Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Shelley Specchio. I'm CEO of MyBor Realtor Association and Broker Listing Cooperative. And I want to thank you for joining us for MyBor's first virtual presentation of our Raise the Bar series and economic update. As you know, here at MyBor, we've been working hard from home, but hard to make sure that we're keeping our members up to date and in the know about all the fast changing details of this difficult time. So several of you will have seen our weekly Facebook Live presentations. If not, they're available on the myboard.com/coronavirus webpage. And I'm very pleased this week, though, not to be bringing you the information myself, but instead I'll be able to learn right along with you from our special guest, internationally acclaimed economist, Elliot Eisenberg. But first, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping. We're expecting to have almost 500 people on this Zoom call today. We had 483, I think, registrations. So I expect it to go smoothly, but if anything happens, be sure to try to join back in and know that no matter what, we are posting a recording of this presentation on our mybor.com website, so you'll have access to it. And Dr. Eisenberg will be happy to take questions at the end of his presentation, so be sure to use the chat feature at the bottom center of your page here. I know we're all becoming Zoom experts now, so the MyBor team are going to be helping me organize those questions, so keep them coming and we'll be sure and ask as many as we can to Dr. Eisenberg at the end. And so now it is my privilege to introduce you to Elliot Eisenberg, PhD. I personally have had the great good fortune to see him speak on about a dozen occasions, and he invariably delivers an enormous amount of information in a fast, exciting, and accessible way. Dr. Eisenberg earned his BA in economics with first-class honors from McGill University in Montreal, as well as a master and PhD in public administration from Syracuse University. He has spoken with hundreds of business groups and associations on all topics, including economic impact of industries such as home building and the consequences of government regulation and other current economic issues. He has been invited to testify before lawmakers and is often asked to comment on proposed legislation. His research and opinions have been featured in Bloomberg, Businessweek, Forbes, Fortune, and other publications, and he is regularly featured as a guest on talk and public radio. Dr. Eisenberg was formerly a senior economist with the National Association of Home Builders in Washington, D.C., and he is the creator of a multifamily stock index, the first nationally recognized index to track the total return of public firms principally involved in the ownership and management of apartments. And if all of that is not enough to assure you that he really knows his stuff, you may recognize his name from quotes in our own MyBor monthly market inserts press release, because Dr. Eisenberg has a monthly call with our data analyst, Brad Coffing, and our communications team to discuss what we're seeing in the local Central Indiana housing numbers. So without further ado, it is my just distinct honor to get to introduce you to Elliot Eisenberg. And Elliot, please tell us what is happening with this economy. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Shelley. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I wish my enthusiasm for presenting and talking was as good as the economic data I'm going to show. I think that's the sad part of it. Let's begin by taking a step back. And let's remember our GDP equation back from high school or a bad college course or something you had that you hopefully thought you'd never need again. There are four terms in this thing. C, household consumption, the first term, 70% of GDP. I, the second term, corporate investment in plant and equipment. The third term is G, government spending. And the fourth term is net exports, exports minus imports. I'll use these symbols over the course of the talk, so hopefully you'll get familiar with them. Now, before the recession began, so this is like last December and just past January and February, and for the better part of all of 19 actually, C was the only term we had working in GDP. I wasn't going anywhere because the dollar was strong, the globe was slowing, trade disputes with China and so on. G, government spending wasn't going anywhere really, it was declining because the tax cuts from 18 were slowly working their way through and we were habituating to them. And net exports were weakening because the dollar's strong and the trade war and all that kind of stuff. So we only had C before this recession started. And what did the recession do? The recession, what did it do? It locked us in our homes. And when you're locked in your house, you spend less money. You don't go to the restaurant, you don't go to a movie theater, you don't go to a baseball game, you don't go to a rock concert. all these things that we do on a regular basis that take a lot of our money and a lot of our time, as we've discovered, are no longer happening. So C, that first term in GDP, is getting really, really tiny. That's the problem. And what the government is doing right now to compensate by this is to push up G. So the contraction in C is going to be inversely affected by increases in G, such that hopefully the impacts on our economy aren't all that horrible. That's what's happening. You can think of it this way. We've just had a healthcare crisis. This healthcare crisis could very quickly turn into a financial crisis where no one lends money to anybody. And then when the firms can't get money, they lay off all their workers, and that becomes an economic crisis. Healthcare crisis, financial crisis, economic crisis. And the government is trying desperately to put buffers between the healthcare crisis and the financial crisis by making sure financial markets operate, and between the financial crisis and the economic crisis by making sure that people who are unemployed get money and businesses stay alive. So there's two sets of government programs that are in there trying to prevent this blob from going from hospitals to finances, finances to economics. We'll see how successful it is, but it's critically important that they've done it. It's already made a huge difference. It's prevented the worst from happening. Now, let's give you an indicator of how bad growth in the second quarter, which we began 2 weeks ago, will be. And you may want to get some Kleenex and weep along with me as you look at this data. It is profoundly horrible. There's no two ways about it. I cannot wrap this up in pretty paper or throw some puppy dog pictures here. The economic decline we're going to experience in Q2 is unlike any economic decline the US has ever experienced in history. The key thing here is we're not going to have another bad quarter after this, or if we do, it's very minimal, and then there'll be a recovery. And that's because there's all these firewalls that the government has been put onto the economy to prevent this from continuing. So the depth is there, but not the duration, and there'll be a relatively quick recovery. This is important. Look at the data. You can see the best, the most optimistic company says -10, the most pessimistic says -40. I'm in the -27, 28% category. If you look at economists as a group and you survey the economists, the Wall Street Journal does this on a regular basis, this is what you see. You see the first quarter decline of about 3%. That's what we just had. Second quarter decline about 25, and then a recovery in the third and fourth quarters of about 6% each. 6% growth is spectacular, right? But not after you had a 25% decline. And making matters a little worse, if you look at the 3% decline right here on the chart, it looks like nothing compared to this. But if you compare it over here to the left of the recession of 2008-9, the Great Recession, it's not trivial. There are 6 bad quarters. This one here that we're having now, that we just had, would be the third, would be right in the middle. There are 2 that are worse, but 3 that are less bad. So this is objectively not a great quarter we just had. And remember, January and February were good. The first half of March was pretty good. And then it all nosedived second half of March. So this impact that we're seeing here is mostly the second half of March with a little bit of the first half of March. April, of course, is like the second half of March. We're all locked in our houses, going nowhere, going stir crazy, right? Looking forward to taking out the trash and dressing up because of it. That's why Q2 is going to be so terrible. But there are these buffers, as I mentioned, between the healthcare crisis and the financial crisis, and between the financial crisis and the economic crisis. That's why there's a recovery in Q3 and Q4 here. Absent that financial aid from the government, we wouldn't have it, and we'd be in the soup for a long time. We'll still be in there for, March, April, May, June, maybe July, but then things start to turn around. I'm not quite as optimistic as this forecast for Q3, but I am that optimistic at least for Q4. So, we're not going to have this, it's going to be deep, but it isn't going to be very long. Now, let's look at some consumer confidence numbers. I mean, these numbers are downright scary a little bit, right? I mean, look at this decline in consumer confidence. Whoa, we're now back here in, almost the depths of the Great Recession. We're not quite there. We'll get there in a few weeks, but we're not there yet. But this is going to be the magnitude of the consumer sentiment feelings here. That one took a lot longer to happen, as you can see here. It didn't decline overnight. It looked like it went pretty fast. But compared to this decline here was downright slow, right? So consumer confidence is weak here in the States. Consumer confidence in Germany, which is the biggest economy in Europe, is doing pretty dismally as well. This is a global affair. The benefit that we have in the US is because this came to us chronologically later than it came to Asia and Europe, Southeast Asia, and it was China. and Europe. By the time we recover, they will be ahead of us. So the supply chain problems for us won't be as bad as they are for them in other countries. Like China can't sell stuff, they can't get stuff because we're closed down. Europe has similar problems, they can't get stuff. By the time we get going, we can get stuff from Europe and China. So our recovery will be a little quicker than the European recovery will be, right? Look at hotel occupancy rates. This is unparalleled, right? They're down by 50, 60%, 70% actually, right? Average daily rate per room, the price they can charge for a room is down 40, and the revenue per room is down 80 because more rooms are vacant than ever before. So hotels stink. Air travel is down by 95%. Air travel now is at the level the US experienced on a regular basis in 1954. That's 65 years ago. Our economy is taking a pounding because we're home all day. That's the problem. But the government is trying desperately hard to replace that income such that when we get back to work and get out of our houses, we can start to spend money and we won't default in our homes and apartments in the meantime. Movie ticket sales are going nowhere, literally, because there are no sales. Now, there's Netflix, and that's helping all that sort of stuff. This is from movie theaters, right? But you get the idea. There's been precipitous declines. Restaurant traffic, it's zero because no one goes. This is open table. There's some takeout going on, but relatively speaking, not all that much. And it's more the cheaper restaurants that do takeout. The McDonald's and Burger King are doing well. Maybe the Cheesecake Factory is doing okay. But Chez Mybor, where a Chateaubriand for two is $300, and the hostess, Shelley Specchio, it's not happening there. So you're seeing all these sectors of the economy weaken. Now, importantly, look at automobiles. Automobiles, in my mind, are a critically important thing because they have big supply chains. And if you compare them to housing, there's something there. Because autos are the single biggest purchase consumers make outside of a house. At least most consumers. I'm sure Michael Bloomberg buys other things that are really costly. But you get the point here. So if you see auto sales doing poorly, it's a harbinger of what households or housing is going to do, be it new or existing. And this data here I'm showing you right now, I'm letting you down slowly, is the first 2 weeks of the month of March. And you can see on average we're down by about 15%. Let's now add the second half of March here. Look at the far right of the graph, the very far right, that vertical declining line. That's the decline in auto sales. So auto sales declined by about a third in March. But the first half of the month, they only fell 15%, meaning they fell by more like 45 the second half of March. 15 plus 45 is 60, divided by 2 is 30%. Which means April's car sales are going to be down by roughly 50%. That's giving us a feeling of what housing is going to be doing nationally. There's differences, of course, but it's giving us an idea of big ticket items. We don't have consumer sentiment. We're not really excited. We're not buying big ticket items unless we kind of have to, right? But there's an upside to this. Certain sectors are rocketing. First, eggs. Eggs are up by a factor. It used to be $1 a dozen. Now they're $3 a dozen. Cheap source of protein. Booze is doing well because we're home with our families and we want to inebriate ourselves. But wait, there's more. Gun sales are up. Maybe we just want to target practice. Maybe we have an uncle we hate. I don't know, just saying. And last but not least, marijuana sales are excellent. And I would never suggest this in Ohio if it's illegal in Ohio. So do not suggest in any way that I am recommending you consume illegal substances. I'm just saying, though, we're home, we're tired, we're bored, and we want to do something, right? And so we're doing something. If you put this together, the first term in GDP is going to perform horrendously. The data doesn't show it. This shows the end of the fourth quarter of 2019. But it's going to fall by 15%. If you look at the middle of the graph, just to the left of center, you see the bottom there at about negative 2.5%, right? And GDP fell in the worst quarter by about 2.5 or 3%. So we can see a decline in consumer spending by about 20 or 25, maybe 28% this quarter, because we're just not spending any money. There's nothing to spend it on. There's only so much Instacart we want to go shopping, right? And marijuana is not legal in all 50 states, so that's not going to happen either. Luckily, booze shops are considered an essential service. Otherwise, we'd fire our politicians. Now, second term in GDP is I, corporate investments in plant and equipment. That's going to depend entirely on business confidence. Here's the first graph I show you. And you can see here that straight decline in business confidence, right? That decline right here in business confidence, that was just March. Wait till April comes. It'll be much lower. The low we had here for the last recession was 80. We're now at 96 or 97 or something. We'll fall another 15, 20, 30 points. I don't know what, but corporations aren't going to be investing in plants and equipment. There's absolutely no way that's going to happen. They're not confident about the future. Look at oil prices. So Ohio, Indiana, the Midwest, you don't have a lot of energy going on in your state, right? Ohio has a little bit. West Virginia has more. But look at the rig counts in the U.S. They're well down because oil prices have collapsed. They've collapsed because Russia and Saudi Arabia are fighting. So we have a once in a generation increase in unwanted supply. There's no demand for it. We're increasing supply up to last week by about 5 million barrels. And the demand for oil has fallen by a once in a lifetime decline of 20%, maybe 25%, from 100 million barrels a day consumed nationally, globally, down to about 70 million barrels. So we've lost 25 million, 30 million barrels in demand, and we've increased supply by 5 million. What were they thinking? But it's killing the U.S. oil market, and the U.S. is the world's biggest producer of oil. These cheap prices of oil help consumers, but we have nowhere to go. So it's just crashing the oil patch and not helping consumers because we have nowhere to drive. Driving is well down, right? So insurance companies are giving rebates to their auto policy holders. You can see some glimpse of the global demand decline, and I think these are all underestimates actually. But it's a pretty slide, and they're from reputable places. But no one really knows because we've never experienced this sort of thing. So the news is tough. Oil prices, you can see it, this crash to lows we haven't seen in almost 20 years, let alone inflation. That makes it even longer. So, and corporate profits, as we're discovering today in the stock market, earnings season starting and corporate profits aren't good. There's no guidance. Firms have no idea what's going to happen in Q2. I'm not sure why the stock market was surprised corporate earnings are bad. This didn't take a rocket scientist to figure out. If you don't leave your house, you're not going to be consuming a lot of stuff. But the stock market's an irrational animal, very hard to understand. But be that as it may, the stock market bounces around because where sentiment goes up, sentiment goes down, and it is what it is. Some days we feel good, some days we don't feel good. Corporate profits are lousy, right? And there's a lot of low quality debt out there held by corporations, non-financial corporate debt. And I draw your attention primarily to the stuff in gray here, or silver. This is triple B. So if this is above here is investment grade debt, and below here is non-investment grade debt, or crappy stuff, or junk bonds, or high yield bonds, or whatever you want, a euphemism you want to use. There's a lot of restrictions. If your bonds fall in rating from triple B to double B minus, just one rung in the grading ladder, a triple A, double A, triple B, then double B. A lot of firms, investors can't invest in those bonds. When firms can't invest in the bond, the price of the bond falls, and the correlated yield in the bond goes up. Price goes down, yield goes up. And now you have the makings of a financial crisis, because these firms that issued these bonds now have to refinance, because some companies inevitably have to refinance their debt all the time. These companies do now, and then 3 years later those do, but those 3 years are up now, and they have the unlucky bad fortune of having to refinance right now. And they can't, because their investment grade quality is gone, the interest rates are higher. That's why the central bank is getting involved. The government is creating all these fire stops between the health crisis and the financial crisis right there. And the central bank is getting in. They're buying a lot of this debt to drive interest rates down, pushing prices up, interest rates fall. They go in opposite directions. The central bank is getting involved wildly to prevent this financial crisis. Because if the financial crisis comes, the firm can't refinance, they're going to fire all their workers. And that's desperately what Congress and the central bank are trying to avoid. And they're doing a decent job. I wouldn't say it's great, but it's decent. And it's the best they can do under such short circumstances. Now you can see in the far right of this graph, the purple color, that's downgrades from investment grade to below investment grade. So this is an easy way you can get the financial crisis turning into an economic crisis. And again, there's a buffer there as well. If you lose your job, you're going to get unemployment insurance. You're going to get more unemployment, $600 a week more. You're going to get longer unemployment, 13 extra weeks on top of what your state provides. So we're trying to put these firewalls here and here to dampen the decline and to expedite the recovery and shorten the period at the bottom of the cycle. Right? This is unparalleledly quick activity. Manufacturing, Ohio, in the Midwest here, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, all these states on the near and around the Great Lakes are massively big manufacturing areas. So there's extra hurt going to go on in general. Not so much in Indianapolis. You're much less manufacturing than around the state and around the area of the upper Midwest. But manufacturing's in recession too. Who's going to invest in plant and equipment at a time like this? It's simply not going to happen. So if you look at factory utilization rates, this data came out this morning, and it's just for March. Look at that precipitous decline. Now that decline is in part, or large part, at least now, because of automakers. They're not making cars, and they're not making car parts. So cars and car parts are way down. That's hurting this. Next month, it'll be other factories that are down while the autos remain down because the factories don't want to make cars that no one's buying. And we know car sales are doing very poorly. So there's no point running up your inventory. That's just pointless. You have to lower the price of the cars when you start to sell them down the road if you've got more than the 60-day magical inventory number, which is the ideal number that firms like to have in the auto world. So firms aren't going to invest in plant equipment. Capital goods orders were flat. This is through February, not March. And you can see through Feb it was already flat, not good. And now it's going to nosedive completely like a dive bomb. But I want to draw your attention to this graph carefully, and specifically this part right here in the middle. This total package is $2 trillion, 10%, almost 10% of GDP. The government has gotten involved. The Secretary of Treasury, both houses of Congress, Trump, have all gotten involved, some to more or less degrees, but they're all involved. And this is a huge, huge plan. And Congress is already working on another one because they know that the PPP, the Payment Protection Plan or Payroll Protection Plan, whatever called, and is going to run out of money. And the small business loans are going to run out. SBA loans are going to run out. The EIDL, I think they're called, but I'm not 100% sure. And you should get your money if you qualify. Up to 2.5 times the payroll if you keep your payroll pretty much flat. Congress, of that $2.2 trillion, Congress gave $454 billion to the central bank, about a quarter of the money. And the central bank will lend about 10 to 1 against that money. The central bank is going to lend to almost anybody who has something resembling collateral. So if you walk in and say, hey, I got a pen, can I borrow $5 against the pen? The central bank may well say yes. I'm joking, but you have to be a big institution. But they'll lend against they're lending against state and local bonds, which they've never done before. They're lending against junk bonds, which they've never done before. This is to prevent the healthcare crisis from becoming a financial crisis and to prevent the financial crisis from becoming an economic crisis. We don't want wholesale unemployment. We don't want people having no money. We want firms to survive so they can get through the bad period and get better. That's really, really important here. And by doing this, by putting these fire breaks up, the government is making sure we don't have a prolonged recession or one that stays deep for a really long time either. It can't stop the depth, but they can surely stop the duration, right? Now, this is an interesting graph. It shows how big government spending is. It's going to go up dramatically because of the coronavirus this year, right? Government spending is already usually around 21, 22% of GDP. You add 10, 12% more, you're at 35, 36% of GDP, second only to the World War II. And it may get bigger if the lockdown lasts longer than the end of April. And the recovery takes longer because the new normal is going to be very different than the old normal. We're not going to be going to rock concerts on May 1st if we're let out of our houses. We're not going to go to a bar and hang around with 500 of our closest friends in a confined area, right? When we're let out of our houses, we're going to be much more conservative than that. So this spending may actually end up being considerably higher than what it is right now, projected to be about 34%. Deficit's going to get much bigger. Don't worry about it. When your house is burning, you put the fire out. You don't think about, oh, the water bill is going to be high next month. To hell with the water bill. This is the time to stop the deficit, stop the economy's shrinkage. The government has put our economy into like a coma, and we have to survive this coma and get out and not be wildly worse off. That's why they're giving small business, big business, to central banks doing things. They just lent airlines $25 billion. They're thinking of everything they can do. They're thinking quickly and big. Two things they didn't do in 2008. There they waited 8 or 9 months before the recession was half over before they began to do things on the fiscal policy side and the monetary side. Here they waited 2 weeks, which was 2 weeks too long, but nonetheless rocket speed. This is rail traffic. This is for intermodal, so we're taking containers full of stuff and putting them on trucks and then lifting them and putting them on a ship, right? And you can see 18 was the peak year. We're so far down, and we're just going to go down because manufacturing's in recession, transportation's in recession, exports are in recession, dollar's strong, globe is weak. It's a lot of stuff. This is just carloads of stuff. This includes wheat, commodities, energy, so coal, right? Stuff like that, oil. It's doing poorly too. And 18 wasn't a good year here. 13 and 14 were the best years when oil was expensive and commodities were high priced as well. Not doing well. We still have a trade war. That's raising the cost of buying stuff from China that we still need. And the dollar, as I mentioned before, is also strong, hurting exports, hurting manufacturing because we're not exporting so much stuff. So we have a lot of impediments, but the most important one being coronavirus by far. Look at this graph. This graph gives you an inkling of how weak our economy became. You look at this graph, it sees you 10, 12 years of data, 14 years of data, going back to the recession of 2008-9. And the number generally bounced around between, at most, +1 and at worst, about -1. Except from the far left where we had the recession hit -4. This graph shows -9, but it's not. If you look on the far right, it says axis range truncated. So let's go see what the actual number is. It's in the 30s. It's really bad. Look at the next graph. This graph tells you how unlikely what we are experiencing is based on the last 5 years of what we had. Last 5 years, if you come to me and say, Elliot, what are the chances of an economic decline of 25 or 30% in a quarter based on the pattern we've had since 2000, the end of 2014? I would say that's like 12 standard deviations out of the norm. That's like 0.0000000000001, something like that. Maybe I don't have enough zeros, maybe too many, but you get the point. This is unprecedented, unparalleled, unbelievable, inexplicable. But the duration will be short. That's the important thing, because we got these firewalls between the health crisis, the financial crisis, and the economic crisis. This recession will last no more than 6 months. It'll last March, April, May, June, and by then we should be at the bottom. We should be all done. We should be out of our houses by then and doing what we're going to be doing, and things will begin to improve. They're not going to improve a lot. It may take us till August or September before we start to really start motoring. When we're convinced that there's a protocol out there, we have enough ventilators, we can handle pretty much anything. A vaccine, there are several vaccines that are progressing through the system in various countries, and there's some real optimism we're going to get a vaccine for it come not this fall, but next fall or next spring or whatever the year, a year and a half from now. But this will be a very deep but very short recession. That's because of government intervention and the willingness of government to do more. I mean, they're already working now on plan phase 4, which would be $400, $500 billion more to help small business and the unemployed and so on and so forth, because they don't want things to go bad. This gets us to the question of what's this recession going to look like? Initially, economists were hoping for a V-shaped recession, where the decline, the rapid decline, was matched by a rapid improvement. Not going to happen. Because you can close a business down in 5 seconds. You can close the lights, mail the keys off to let the landlord and walk out. You can't reconstitute a business that fast. It just doesn't happen. And if you've lost your employees because they're unemployed and they went to work at another firm, you got to hire new workers, develop relationships with vendors, all these things. It's complicated. It takes time. So that means the recession might be U-shaped. We linger at the bottom for a while. We go down, we go back up, but we linger at the bottom. Maybe people like me have said it's a bathtub. So we linger longer at the bottom, linger longer at the bottom. I'm not convinced it's a bathtub. I don't think there's any reason for us to linger very long at the bottom. I think what we're going to have is a checkmark recovery. Not a steep recovery like this, but a good recovery like that. Strong decline and a slow and steady improvement. And we'll linger at the bottom for a month or 2 as we get our bearings, and then the job market starts to improve. Your job is to get through the next couple of months, the last half of March, which you've gotten through, the first half of April, which you've gotten through. You've gotten through 4 weeks, 4 of the worst 8 weeks of this system. Congratulations, you're still around, and you're not drunk by noon, right? Because booze sales are up. Now, labor markets. This is going to impinge on home sales. Inevitably, if you're unemployed, you can't buy a house. Now, unemployed people or people who are marginally employed probably weren't big homeowners in the first place. Some of them were, but most were probably renters. That having been said, look at this graph. On the bottom of the graph, like a little worm, is 50 years of weekly claims for unemployment. They bounce around. The low is 200,000. The all-time high was somewhere in the recession here of about 685 or 690,000. Good to go until 3 weeks ago. And now it's almost 7 million. This is truly inconceivable. If you go from your all-time worst, you become 10 times worse than your all-time worst. And you do it for 2 weeks in a row. The first week was 3 million, so 5 times worse. And then 2 weeks in a row, 6.5 million each month. That's 16 million people who've lost their jobs. Unbelievable. We only create 2.5 million a year. You've just lost 6-7 years of jobs at a regular normal pace of job creation, right? So any job problems you had finding people to do things for you, not so much now. You want to expand your team, hire people, you'll have an opportunity to do it. You really will. What you actually want to do if you want to look is hire people from other places that aren't doing well. They're going to go down. You want to grab their employees. Here's another way of looking at it. Unemployment rate on the right-hand side jumped up to 4.5% from 3.5%. Let me tell you something. 3 months ago, when the economy was good, and I went out and gave lectures, I would say to people, if the unemployment rate rose by 0.5% over 6 months, so a tenth of a point every single month for 6 months, 5-6 months, so you go from 3.5 to 4% over 6 months, I would say, I bet we're in recession. We just went up by a whole percentage point, so twice as much, in 1 month, a sixth as much time. And next month, it'll jump to 9 or 10%. So unemployment is going to go way up. Labor shortage problems are going to utterly and completely disappear. Wage rates aren't going to go up much because there's going to be ample unemployed out there, right? We may see a weird increase in hourly wages because places like restaurants and travel bureaus, there are many of them, bars and so on, sporting places, are letting go all their lower hourly workers and keeping, for example, the chef, the corporate chef that they've got, the fancy chef that they've got, and their general manager. Them they're keeping. But the waiters and waitresses, adios, amigos, right? Because there's no one to serve. So you keep the high-paid workers and just the low-wage workers, where average wages go up. But this is just going to be an artifact of this weirdness of the economy and how the recession is hitting us. Now, there's concern about inflation. Well, we're going to have a lot of inflation because there's tons of money into the economy. It's true, there's tons of money coming into the economy, but the money coming in from the federal government and the lending occurring from the central bank is there to replace what was lost. So as the economy comes back on, we'll begin to supply more sandwiches, more restaurants, more baseball games, and we'll have more money to spend. So I truly don't see inflation. We didn't see it for 10 years. I'll show you in a second. There's no inflation out there. Look at these graphs. This is CPI, what you think of as inflation. Blue is headline CPI. Every month, CPI increased 0.2% or 2.2 year over year. That's the blue line, including food and energy. Red excludes food and energy. Over the course of 12 months, they're the same, but one bounces around much more than the other. Economists like to look at red because it doesn't bounce around so much. It gives us the underlying mojo of the economy, if you will. Right? Do you see inflation on the far right here? Do you see inflation? There's no inflation going on. There's nothing going on. We're not going to have inflation. There's no inflation in China. There's no inflation in Europe. There's no inflation in Japan. There's no inflation in Canada, Australia, or Mexico. The only places that have inflation are in Argentina and Venezuela because they're incompetent managers of their economies. Those are man-made problems. They're nothing to do with anything else except bad policy, right? This is the Fed's favorite measure of inflation, personal consumption expenditure inflation. Same, red, no food and energy, blue, food and energy. Do you see a trend on the far right? Do you see it going up wildly? No. As a matter of fact, now it's starting to go down. Producer prices are negative. Import prices are starting to turn negative. Export prices are starting to turn negative because there's excess supply of everything, right? Hotels, they're cheaper than they were. You better believe it. Restaurants are going to be cheaper when we get out of the recession too, because no one's going to go. How about interest rates? That matters for housing a lot. So this is my favorite graph from the whole presentation. What it shows us is taller central bank chair, higher interest rates. On the far left, Paul Volcker, really high rate, tall guy. Then Greenspan shorter, Bernanke shorter, Yellen shorter, Powell's even shorter. Powell raised rates and then he brought zero because he realized he shouldn't have been hired. He's just too tall for the job. Kidding aside, he's done a bang-up job. He gets my credit, and he isn't even an economist. He's a miserable lawyer, and I still give him an immense amount of credit for what he's done. He's thought quickly, creatively, and is making the Fed's balance sheet available to anybody, essentially. We owe him, Congress, a debt of thanks for keeping us out of a really terrible recession. Now, in terms of short-term interest rates, where are we going? The Fed funds rate's now between 0.25%, and the Fed has promised not to go to negative rates. The reason the Fed doesn't want to hit negative rates is in Europe, they've done it in Japan, it ruins your banks. I'm not going to get into why during Q&A, you can ask me. But negative rates lead to very weak banks. And with a weak bank, you're not going to have lending. That means the recovery is going to be very bad. So no negative rates. A year from now, at the end of this year, rates are the same. Almost 2 years from now, the end of 2021, maybe Powell's feeling a little spunky and he raises rates by a quarter point. And if he really feels frisky, he raises them another quarter point 2 years from now. What I mean to tell you is the 10-year treasury, as you can see on the right, really isn't going anywhere. Rates aren't going to be moving because we're not going to have phenomenal GDP growth. We have good GDP growth, but we'll still have a massive amount of unemployment out there. So we'll still have a weaker economy. Even though GDP growth is good, we'll still have a lot of unemployment going around. Right now, let's talk about housing and then we'll wrap it up and take some questions. My prognostications for the housing market in the short run are not good. They're not good anywhere. They're actually better in Indianapolis than they are in the rest of many parts of the country. You should be pretty happy. As unhappy as you are, you should toast to your relative economic health. So copper prices are a good measure of construction activity globally. Now, U.S. housing construction is a big chunk of all construction, but there's more going on in developing countries, China, and so on. But copper prices tell us something, right? They haven't been particularly good of late. Before the recession started, right? They weren't particularly hot. Builders seemed happy enough through February. A data came out today. I didn't have time to put this slide in. I apologize. I want you to think of where builder sentiment is. So NHB, the home builders, put out every month a survey asking builders, how happy are you, basically? And it was up there about 70. I want you to think of the number you think it is now through March. Data came out in April today for March. You ready? The number 30. So it fell from 70 to 30. This is a number we haven't experienced in 10 years. Builders went from being really happy to really unhappy. They were so happy because December, January, and February were the best 3 months of home building since the end of the recession. It really looked like home building was going to help 2020 be a good year. And we were going to rely on home building for the first time in 12 years. It was going to be one of the horses that kept the economy moving. And now they got crushed like bugs, right? So we're not buying cars. Builder sentiment sucks. This is a short-run problem, but you can't ignore it and think that it's going to be good tomorrow. University of Michigan buying conditions for large household durables, excluding automobiles. But it's short. Remember, it may not be a V, but it's a check mark. Now we're still in this part. We have a really bad mid-March through at least the end of April, 6 weeks in our home. We're 2/3 the way through, maybe they extended a bit. This is the very worst time. This will not persist. It's terrible, but it won't persist. It's like when you stub your toe on a corner of a piece of furniture. It hurts like hell, but you know that in a minute or 2 or 3, it ends. We're now stubbing our toe on the edge of the furniture. Immensely painful, but quite temporary. Mortgage purchase applications. First-time mortgage apps come out weekly. Very useful data because it's very timely and it's reasonably comprehensive. It's pretty good data. It really is. It's down 35% year over year. So comparing this week to a year ago, we're down 35% nationally. And so this began to decline 5 weeks ago. 5 weeks ago, we had a 1 or 2% decline, followed by an 11% decline. Then it went up to 24%, then 33, and now 35. So it looks like we're starting to top out after these one small week, then 3 weeks in a row, roughly 10 percentage point declines. Now another small 2% decline. So maybe we hit 40, 42, and we're done. We linger there for a while, and then it begins to get less bad. That's really important. I can't stress this enough to you how important this is. Now, pending sales here in Indianapolis, while they're not great, aren't that bad. You're better than the nation. Prices are up still 22%, right? That's a crazy big number. Pending sales are down 27, 28, but not 35. That's a huge difference. It's a big difference. You're much better off than the nation as a whole. Housing prices are relatively inexpensive. You're a big city surrounded by smaller towns and agriculture, so people are moving in, so your population's doing relatively well. You don't have a large amount of hospitality. You have some, inevitably. You have basketball and NCAA, there's a lot of stuff there, and football and stuff, but nothing more than the average bear, generally speaking. So you're nicely, pleasantly resistant here. You're going to get hit like everybody, but not like Orlando and Las Vegas, where there's tons of tourism, or Midland, Odessa, Texas, where there's tons of energy. Those places are getting crushed, absolutely crushed. But this is giving you an inkling of you're being hit, but not quite as bad as the nation. If you look at all the types of variables that are of interest out there, right? Pending sales are down, as I said, 27%. Closed sales are only down 15%, and most of those are going to get financed. So you're down half as much as the nation as a whole. Again, pending sales down 27, 28%, but closed sales down 14, 15. So it's half as bad. Congratulations to you. This is terrific. So you're suffering, but not as much. Now, if you put this graph here, but instead of looking every year by adding on some graph to the prior year, you overlay 1 year over the other, a 35% decline in first-time mortgage apps shows up as the blue graph. So you can see we've fallen 7 or 8 years worth of mortgage activity increases, or home sales activity increases, roughly. They're not exactly one-to-one, but they're very similar. So this is going to be a short and painful decline. But home prices will not be adversely affected much compared to last time. Last time, the housing recession, the housing bust, the housing bubble, it was centered in the housing market, and it was made worse because when the recession came, we had ample oversupply. We had millions of extra houses. Now we still remain with the housing shortage we had. People are still around. They may not have a job, but they need a place to live. And we have no excess supply of housing at all. The housing shortage persists. Housing is now being impacted like every other industry. They're just collateral damage to COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-20, whatever they call it, right? 19. Housing is not special here. And in Indianapolis, you're a little bit more protected because of house prices being low. You're not on the coast, so you didn't have the booms or the busts, relatively speaking. If you look at this graph, so we had a 20-25% decline at its worst year-over-year decline. They declined by more than that cumulatively, right? It was 25 or 30%, 25, 26% overall. Look back to 1990. That was the last recession where housing didn't lead the charge. They were just collateral damage. House prices fell 5%. Could they fall 5% again? Sure. Are they likely to fall 5% in Indianapolis? Probably not so much because people may move to Indianapolis. Why? Because you're less dense than New York City. Literally, people are afraid, a little bit afraid now of density. Seattle, Detroit, New Orleans, New York City, these are places that have been hit hard by COVID. You want to be a little bit out of the center of the place and high density, move somewhere else. Youngsters can't afford to live on the coast. They move to the interior.
They moved to places like Columbus and Indianapolis, which were booming towns. Great cultural scenes, sports, music, symphonies, parks, biking paths, and objectively, by comparison to the coast, and especially the West Coast, profoundly inexpensive housing. So these things will all help you ameliorate the problem, right? And their house prices aren't expected to decline much. The recession is going to be sweet and short. Some desperate sellers are going to appear, yeah, sure. But remember, your market was so hot through the March, even though the last half of March started to go downhill in a hurry. When I looked at the data, I didn't see any evidence. Had I not known COVID was there in the second half of March and you were shut down in your house, I wouldn't have known, because your market was red hot. So you enter this situation in an incredibly good position. You'll be hit for 6 or 8 weeks, and then we start to improve again because of all the government intervention. And we walk into this with serious delinquent loans at a remarkably low level. They're back where they were in 2003 or 4. This is Fannie and Freddie's inventory. And we come with our mortgage origination FICO scores being really, really, really good, which is important. I think I've sort of kind of largely finished my presentation. We can talk about Q&A. We can talk about servicing issues now that are front of mind, I think, for a lot of people for obvious reasons. But this is how to get a hold of me. My cell number, my email address, my phone number, my Twitter handle, and if you want to get my daily 70 words of economics with no graphs, no ads, no charts, no links, and no photos, go to econ70.com or text the word bow tie, one word, no hyphen between bow and tie, no space between bow and tie, to the 5-digit number 22828. You'll be prompted for an email address, and I'll send it to you every single day until you die. And if you go to hell because you drink too much booze or something, then I follow you and you get my 70 words there too. It's been a pleasure chatting. I hope I've given you the right balance here. Is the next 3-4 weeks going to be bad? You bet. Really bad. We've had a terrible month, the worst month ever the last month, but it will be short. We can argue how quick the recovery is. We can argue how the slope of the recovery is. But after a couple months at the bottom, we start to recover. And we may well have job growth of 500,000 jobs a month, which would be unbelievably great job growth, and watch the unemployment rate fall by 1/3 or 0.5% a month for 3 years as we work down this unemployment rate. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Shelley. Thank you, everybody. And if we have time for questions, we do have some time. I'm happy to go as long as you want to go.
Great. Well, we do have some questions, Elliot, so that'll be great. If you stop sharing your screen, then everybody will be able to see your face a little larger.
There we go.
And then we can have a little bit of a conversation. So we have some questions coming in, and I know that the team is kind of putting them together to make sure I ask you them. But the first one that came in, I'm going to ask you the first one that came in instead of my own. I'll ask my own second.
Must be a good question.
The first one that came in was from one of our members named Nick, and he said, "How exactly does the government make up for all this additional spending without raising taxes? All this money that they're pumping into us, how are we going to deal with that added debt?"
What's the next question, Shelley? Okay. So we're going to increase the deficit. That's what's going to happen. The deficit's going to increase by extra $2 trillion this year on top of the $1 trillion already. So we're going to add $3 trillion to our deficit. Am I thrilled about this? No, but there's no alternative, right? Tina, there is no alternative. Because monetary policy under normal conditions is what you would use. And you lower interest rates by 500 basis points or 5 percentage points. But we came into this situation with interest rates already about 1.5%. So you couldn't do that. So then the second thing you do is quantitative easing. And the central bank last time, 2008, was buying $50 billion of bonds a month. And over a year bought 500 or 600 billion. They bought that much last week. So they've taken interest rates to 0 in 2 weeks from 1.5%. Really rapid decline as much as they can. They're doing QE like gangbusters, like pedal to the metal, but it's not enough. People don't have income. You have to help them with income here. You must. If it wasn't such a bad recession, the lower interest rates might spur on investment, whatever, but unemployment's going to be rampant now for a short period of time, but very high. You have to replace the income. Otherwise, then we go into a true depression. So we're going to give unemployment money. I mean, how are we going to pay this off down the road? Yeah, who knows? But the point is,
We have to do it because monetary policy is tired. It's out. There's zero interest rates. And interest rates are blessedly low. Interest rates are 10-year, what? It's 0.7 of a point. We can borrow infinitely at that price. I mean, this is ridiculously cheap. So is there a day of reckoning down the road? We're going to have to raise tax at some point, inevitably. But we have some time because interest rates are low, and this was the appropriate response because there was nothing else that could have been done.
Great. Oh,
Great question.
thank you for explaining that. That's great. And thanks for asking the question, Nick. So my question is, I'm concerned about lending. So can you talk to us a little bit about lending? We're seeing, what are the consequences of the forbearance and sort of the tightening of these credit scores that we're seeing from servicers? What does that mean to the real estate industry for our area?
This is really bad, and this is the law of unintended consequences rearing its ugly head. So we learned from the last recession that banks don't want to own homes. If you don't pay your mortgage, we don't want your house because we get too many houses and then house prices collapse and it's really bad. So the government said, hey, don't pay your mortgage, and tell your servicer we're not going to pay your mortgage, and they have to allow you not to pay your mortgage, and that way you have time to pay your mortgage and things will get better. And if you own a rental property and you have tenants in your apartment and they don't want to pay, you say, okay, and you tell Fannie and Freddie, I'm not going to throw them out if they hold the paper in your multi-family rental property. And then you're okay because you're in forbearance and they're in forbearance and we're good. On the single family side, they didn't quite finish the circuit. They told the homeowners they don't have to pay their mortgage, but the ultimate investors have to get paid. And who makes that payment but the mortgage servicers? And the mortgage servicers will soon run out of money. And when they run out of money, we got a problem. So a way to protect, everyone's now saying, well, who's going to bear the cost of this? They want to avoid that problem. So suddenly you're getting requirements, servicers, so you have to have a FICO score of 700. Maybe you're going to have to put more money into your down payment because they don't want to have a first month default out, whatever. There's a fancy technical word for it, which I forgot what it is. You can't have that. They don't want that. We don't want to get a mortgage and 2 months later stop paying the mortgage, right? This is really, really, really bad because the servicers have no way to get any money to bail themselves out. So you've created a problem where a small, thin reed is now having to accept all the risk of non-payment by this huge group of homeowners. And all they have to say is they don't want to pay. They don't have to prove they've had hardship. They just say it. So the moral hazard here is really bad. I like to think that Powell and Mnuchin are going to get together and do a deal on this. The problem is the overseer of Fannie and Freddie, the natural group that should help the situation by helping the servicers and say, no, we'll absorb the cost because we're owned by the government. We're nationalized. We can cover the cost for a few months or 6 months and then add it to the end of the loan at the end and whatever. And that's the right thing to do. But the head of FHFA, the overseer of Fannie and Freddie says, this isn't a problem. His name is Mark Calaria. And everyone's telling this guy, you've got to do something. He's saying, well, as long as this doesn't go on for a couple of months, like 3 or 4 months, we should be okay. I think he wants to protect Fannie and Freddie for the taxpayer so that when he tries to privatize them in a year or 2 or 3, he can do it. I don't think you can even privatize Fannie and Freddie anymore, given what's happened. And he should throw in the towel and say, yes, I'm going to go to Mnuchin and go to Powell and make them bail out, and not bail out, but help the servicers survive. Because if FICO scores have to go up and down payments have to go up, then the housing market will automatically weaken, and especially first-time buyers. Because who would first-time buyers have super high credit and have excess cash floating around to convince the servicer that you can miss a couple months payment? I mean, when I bought my house, I was flat broke after I bought because I forgot about closing costs. My mistake. So this is a very mild, small problem, but it's incredibly huge. You have to call up your congressman, really call your member of Congress and tell them to get off the dime and help the servicers, because otherwise your industry, and there are over 1 million realtors out there, is going to really take it on the chin, maybe for a short time. But we don't know. We don't know how high unemployment will go. If unemployment hits 20%, you could have 20 million people saying, I don't want to pay my mortgage. And these servicers aren't designed to withstand this stress. It's a long answer, but it's a really important question.
It is thank you so much. I've been spending a lot of time in my brain on that. I am certain that NAR is going to be on that.
Well, they are.
We'll be giving them that support. Now that I understand, so we'll make sure we do call our congressmen. So I'm sure there'll be a call for action.
NAR's interest like bears into honey.
Bears into honey. I like it. So we're getting some other questions. So this is really great. I want to ask. This one came in when you mentioned about the happiness index for the builders.
Oh. Yeah.
They say if they're not happy, how will this affect the long and short-term housing supply that's already tight? So if they're at a 30 and they have to stay at a 30 for 3 months, like what will be the reaction to that?
Great question. Right. So builders aren't happy. They don't build. They're having a hard time. Supply chains in China are adversely affected, right? What else? They can't get timely inspections because the inspectors don't want to come because like there's a person who's on the job site 4 months ago and they might get COVID touching or even looking at something, right? You can't get homes finished now because no one can work on the job site because you can't have more than one worker at a time on the job site. I mean, they're appraisals, forget about those. You can't get those. You can't have a drive-by appraisal for a new house because you've got to go in the house. So the builders face all these really almost insurmountable barriers right now. And the mortgage issue we just talked about, and the unemployment issue that's skyrocketing we're talking about. Nothing good here for home building. Last recession, housing sales declined from, to make the math easy, from 7.5 million at the peak to 5 million, a decline of a third. Housing starts went down by 3/4. So when you catch a cold, the home builders get pneumonia and die. And so what this means, we'll have the housing shortage that was beginning to be mildly ameliorated in December, Jan, Feb. Those last 3 months, when they were building 1.6 million homes, which is the right number to build, it jumped from 1.2 to 1.6 and just overnight. Like they turned the light on. Housing starts bumped up by a third, and now way down. So the housing shortage is going to persist because population growth is occurring. People are turning 16 and 18. They're going to get jobs in a year or 2 or 6 months or 3 years, whatever, and they're going to need a place to live. So the housing shortage will be back on us all over again. Absolutely. And this is just going to reduce construction activity from a good number at 1.6 probably down to 600,000 or 700,000. I mean, it takes a while to slow down. You can't stop a house in the middle, but they'll be busy building their existing house. And then when they finish their house, they're done. And there'll be more consolidation in the industry, and there'll be fewer smaller builders. The last recession culled out half the home builders in the country. This may cut another 20%. There were 80,000 roughly down to 40. This one brings it from 40 probably down to 30. There's a meaningful decline in the industry, size of the industry.
Ooh. Well, let me find a question here that's going to give me a happier answer. I'm not sure if there's going to be one though. Let's see. There's one about manufacturing. What does Elliot think will happen to overseas manufacturing? Will this maybe bring some manufacturing back to the US?
That's a good question. And the answer is yes. I think people are seriously rethinking their supply chains. And there's 2 reasons for this. COVID, obviously, we don't want China to be the only supplier of critical pharmaceutical precursor agents. We also have trade wars. Trade wars now may become more popular. Trump opened the door to trade wars. You never know if China might do a trade war or the European Union. I don't think so, but suddenly things are much more delicate, and the ability to get things just in time is not compensated for the risk we're incurring for these things. So I do see supply chains reshoring, I guess might be the word, or onshoring or something like that. I don't think it'll be a massive amount. We're not going to start making bobby pins here in the States, right? Labor is just too expensive. It has to be a capital intensive industry or a critical part. Think of a part that's not made anywhere else. If there's only a one person supplier or one country supplier, I think that's something that we decide we better make it home. So there'll be some movement back to the US, and the US is more competitive, lots of robotics and so on. So yes, it'll be some. This is a good piece of news. Good news. Yeah.
Good. We're right at 4 o'clock, but there's a couple of really good questions here that I want to ask you.
Oh, we can do it.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so you talked a lot about 6 months. We've talked about the check mark recovery. So if it does end up to be like seasonal, or if the COVID-19, if the virus lasts longer, like 18 months for a vaccine, like some people are saying, if we've already used all the options, I mean, like, how do we buffer if that happens?
Okay, so there are a couple things we do. Time here is, on one hand, the enemy once COVID starts, time's the enemy because this gets worse and worse and worse and worse. But in New York City, it's already peaked out. Italy is already done. Italy's now talking of opening up. I mean, that's how fast you go. You go from 1,000 deaths a day or 2,000 deaths a day to over in a week. Because once you stop moving, the virus doesn't propagate. That's the critical thing. So hopefully it ends. But if it recurs, and I've read articles that will reoccur in fall. I've heard articles that will never go away. I've heard articles that will recur in 2026. You hear weird stuff. But a vaccine will come. So eventually that problem essentially goes away or becomes like the regular seasonal flu. Secondly, we're going to have ventilators. And we're going to have better protocols when you walk into the hospital. Oh, you're sick 4 days, you present with this, then we're going to give you this and this and this and put you on this and do that, and in 6 days you'll be fine. We'll have learned a lot about the virus. Now we're walking in ignorant because the Chinese didn't tell us and still won't tell us about anything, right? They had a huge edge. We botched our policies here too, don't get me wrong. Fauci even said we failed. But the Chinese did us a dirty deal here by lying about the magnitude of the problem and the severity and not sharing biological information with us. But next time around in November, it won't be the same, and we'll have learned our lesson. We will social distance right away. We know that the stakes here are much too high, and it doesn't come across the country. It only comes in hotspots generally. It comes on gangbusters, but only hotspots. So I think we will be able to. I swallow hard as I say it. Tolerate 1 or 2 hotspots in the fall if it comes back. It will be bad, but it won't be nearly like it was now because now we have no idea where the next hotspot is. If we're careful and we behave ourselves, we should keep it generally at bay.
So if it comes back like that, do you think that economically we'll have to shut down the whole country again?
That's the fear W recovery, right? So we have a V shape and then another V shape, right? I don't think we cut the whole country down at that point. What we really should do though now is not let ourselves out prematurely. If I were in charge and as an economist, I want to get the economy going, right? That's my thinking. Health is a second. For healthcare guys, it's the other way around. But we're all talking. I would like to wait 2 full weeks. If we have no new cases anywhere for 2 weeks, that means the virus is gone. Maybe it's 3. I don't know what the magic number is. But that to me personally would be the minimal requirement to get me out of my house. Otherwise, I'm going to be nervous. I'm going to be wearing a mask. I go to work, I come home, and I'm done. Maybe there'll be recurrence. You don't want to do anything to get that recurrence. You want us to do everything you can to prevent that W or that the 2 U's or 2 check marks, whatever.
2 check marks. Okay, so someone's asking.
Wear a mask, elbow bump, all that stuff. Every day, wash your mask every day. If it's a material mask made out of t-shirts or cloth.
Wash your masks, yeah. So someone's asking the best time to list a new house, to bring it onto the market would be the beginning of June, regardless of the price. Are you thinking June's a good time to start listing new homes? Are you thinking it's a good time to buy?
Let me work through the calendar here. So now we're in the middle of April. We know April's completely gone. I mean, the first half of May is probably going to be completely gone too. You have to weigh a couple things here. The season, every city has seasonality going on too. In Indianapolis, the spring season is the best market. So you wait too long, you miss the market. Now the market may in fact change. We may end up having a summer and fall market now because people who wanted to buy a house can't, folks who want to sell a house can. So we're not sure what the market will look like this new world for this 1 year. Maybe it'll be a little bit topsy-turvy. But I would say, yeah, you're not going to get much volume in showing your house until middle of May at a minimum. People aren't going to want to touch doorknobs. They're not going to want to socially be near people. I'm nervous. I see someone come by me. I go, whoa, Right. So, yeah, you got to wait at least a month, maybe a month and a half. I mean, but it depends on the seller and the situation and the uniqueness of the house. I mean, every house is different. I hate to give blanket suggestions here, but yes, a month and a half to wait seems reasonable if they can afford to wait.
And I'll say, just to add, I'll add to that for the members watching is don't forget your virtual options. So there's a lot of virtual showing options that we're pushing, virtual open houses, things like that. So it depends on your seller for sure.
Get into your technology. Take this time to learn technology. Become the best online realtor you can be. I'm not joking.
No.
The young kids, they're going to use their phones. This is a way to get to them much better and faster.
I agree. Here's one asking about, do you have any predictions on what will happen to demand for rentals and rental rates in the country?
REITs have done pretty well I mean, construction is not going to do well at all. We talked about construction, right? We know the builders aren't doing it, and the multifamily builders are different than the single family builders. It's a different industry. It really is. But no, the multifamily REITs are okay. People have to have a place to live. With all this unemployed, some folks are going to lose their house inevitably, and they're going to become renters. So we have a little bit more rental and a little bit less building, meaning a little bit more demand for rental. So I remain as bullish as I was on the rental market, if not more so. If I didn't hate the concept of having tenants, I'd be buying real estate. But I had a realtor, I had a multifamily building that was good, but one and done.
One and done. Okay, here's, I think, the last one. It sort of goes back to my question about the lenders. Do you think lenders will use job history guidelines or ease job history guidelines in the future if buyers have a gap in employment over this time? And will those people have to become renters, or will they be able to still buy?
You gotta believe that some regulator, Fannie and Freddie, will say, you know, if you had an employment gap of 6 months between here and there, we ignore it.
Yeah.
You have unemployment that spikes that fast, that quickly. There's nothing you can do. You can't get a job now. No one's hiring. As a matter of fact, government gave that extra $600 top off for a number of reasons. One of them was to make sure people who they knew couldn't go hunting for a job. So you're unemployed and you can't even look.
Can't even look.
So you're going to run out of benefits prematurely, essentially, without the ability to look. So if you can save a bit of your money, you can last on unemployment a little longer. They're going to have to do something. Otherwise, you're going to have 15 million people who are going to have this gap. And I don't know when the gap, how many years of employment, is it 3 years or 4 years of employment, steady employment they want to see. But this could impact demand in 2021, 22, 23. This will hopefully be dealt with in relatively short order once the economy begins to improve. All equity says it has to be dealt with.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, we're almost 10 minutes over. I'm going to give one little plug because of something you said just made me think of it to our members to remind you that we have down payment resources implemented in the matrix system. So in the BLC, when you look at houses, you can see what programs are available for that house at that location at that price right now. So be sure you're using that program because people might need money, right? Down payment might be more important than ever. So I wanted to say that little plug. And then I want to finish with a little plug again. Elliot, tell everybody again how to get your 70-word blog post. I get it every day. I share it with my friends. I send it to my mom. I love it. I've listened to it for probably how many years? 10 years, Elliot? A long time.
So a long time, that's right. So thank you, Kelly. Yes, thank you. So the way to get it is to text the word bow tie, one word, 6 letters, no hyphen, no space between bow and tie. Put them together to the 5-digit number 22828. You'll then be prompted for an email address, and you'll type in your email address, and then you'll get a response saying, thank you so much for signing up, and you'll hear from me every day. And hey, I look forward to hopefully seeing you guys really one of these days in Indianapolis.
I hope so too, Elliot. I would love to be able to have you come in person.
When the times are right and the COVID is gone and things are different and we're back to some semblance of normalcy. Thank you very much for this virtual invitation.
Thank you so much for doing this for us. And thank you to all of our members who joined us in. We will post the video of this. It'll be available on myboard.com. And Elliot, thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it. Great information.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.